Hello, my friends. Welcome back. Today, we're going to be exploring the idea of what is the dark side of meditation. What is what's hidden in the shadows of meditation? In my experience, meditation is always given this very kind of light side perspective. And from my experience of life and my perspective, would you consider that everything has a light and everything has a dark or a shadow side? So for me, what are the dark sides of meditation? Being a meditator since I was about 25 years old. Well, in my experience of meditation, one of the deep, dark, shadowy sides of meditation is this word, and the word is denial. And for me, what does that mean? Well, denial means that we're unaware or that we are numbing out aspects of us through the meditative process. So when we're meditating and finding this centered space, there can come a point in our meditative process that we actually start to numb things out rather than be aware of things. It can be a way that we hide ourselves rather than find ourselves. So we can start to deny our humanness. There's a lot of teachings out there around the observer. There's a lot of teachings out there around non-duality, which I think are all awesome perspectives. However, they also carry a dark side. And what might be the dark side of non-duality or the observer? For me, again, it is denial of our humanness. It's denial of our feelings. It's denial of our emotions. It's taking a step back and saying, oh, well, I can simply be the observer. And that may be very helpful at times. However, if you're denying what's underneath that, if you're denying your feelings, if you're denying your emotions, those things tend to fester. And my question and or consideration is, where are those emotions and feelings coming from? Maybe from the highest perspective, whatever that means. We are not our feelings. We are not our emotions. Maybe they are parts of us or simply just an experience. Well, if that's true, beautiful, from the highest experience. However, I'm also a human being here on planet Earth and have, in quotes, a lower self. And my lower self, maybe, is here to experience the whole spectrum of emotion, from the greatest of joys to the greatest of pains, and everything in between that. And through the meditative process, in my experience, a part of the dark side is denying your humanness. So, denial. What also comes up for me around that is hiding and not seeking. So through the meditative process, we can get to this point that we become, again, denying our emotions and feelings. And we can do meditation through the guise of we're seeking to find and dive into self. But maybe at times we're doing it to hide. We're doing it to hide from our experiences. We're doing it to hide from our emotions. We're doing it to hide from our feelings. We're doing it to hide from ourselves, not to find ourselves. Would you be willing to consider that the way that we eventually find ourselves can also be the way that we lose ourselves? So that something like meditation may be extremely in-depth way of finding self for a time. And then it can also become a way of losing self, just like any other practice. So consider that part of your meditation practice might actually be to hide from your emotions, to hide from your feelings, and to hide from other aspects of who you are, rather than find yourself. So hiding and not seeking is another potential dark side. Another dark side that I've experienced personally and I've projected onto others is this idea of spiritual arrogance. And I think this comes with anything that human beings tend to get into. In my experience of myself, of course, whatever I study, whatever I dive into, as I start to gain knowledge and maybe wisdom around it, I can feel a sense of arrogance around my perspective. So, back to kind of the mental and emotional and spiritual realms, when we create this spiritual arrogance, I'm a meditator, therefore I'm more observant, I'm more developed, I'm more evolved, I'm more, my perspective is deeper, etc., starts to become a way that, in my perspective, your ego starts to pedestal itself above others, rather than humbling itself to what flows through us and seeing ourselves as a horizontal plane with others. And that no matter what we see in another human being, whether we see their grandeur, their beauty, their evolvement, their perspective, that also the negative aspects that we see in others potentially are aspects of self that we project onto others. Now that's a whole nother video in and of itself. However, my experience of myself as a meditator and myself as an arrogant human being at times is meditation built up a lot of arrogance for me in the beginning. And part of sharing this video is to put that out there and to recognize that within myself when I become extremely arrogant because of the work that I've done. So arrogance. So denial, one dark thing, dark side potentially. Hiding and not seeking, arrogance. And these kind of all fit together in very similar ways. Then another thing that I've noticed in my experience again is that because we have these great sages that a lot of us project onto, let's use Buddha as an example. When you see a statue of Buddha, generally speaking, you see this very kind of chubby, calm, serene character sitting in a meditative pose. And you may project onto or hear others' projections about who the Buddha was. Maybe the Buddha was reactive. Maybe the Buddha was non-reactive. My experience is most people project a tremendous amount of serenity onto the Buddha. And because he's this grand sage meditator, he didn't have reactions. He was able to navigate his feelings and his emotions and be the observer. He was able to take a step back. Beautiful. If that's true, that's awesome for a light side of it. However, as we're starting to meditate, if we take on that costume of the Buddha and we put that on ourselves and we deem it necessary to be like Buddha, to be spiritual or to be developed or to be evolved, can you see that might simply be a mask of the ego projecting itself, trying to be what it perceives someone else to be, and that raises the amount of denial that we hold within us, rather than noticing that maybe as we're going through the meditative process, as we're learning to meditate, as we're learning to dive into ourselves, question ourselves, be curious, be open, be imaginative, watch our reactions, watch our responses, as we're going through all of that, that there's this kind of leveling effect or this experience effect that happens over time, that maybe eventually you get to a place where You can really be very responsive with your emotions, with your feelings, with your reactions. And that it's okay if you're not. It's okay to be reactive. It's okay to react and then respond. It's okay to slowly move yourself toward who you think Buddha is or what the Buddha represents to you. Fascinating for me to consider how often I've competed and compared with someone like Buddha and shamed myself about not being like who I think he was. Based on a lot of quotes that I hear, literally, that I have no idea if the Buddha himself actually said. So interesting how we project onto these great sages and then put the pressure on ourselves to be like them. That's a pretty fascinating perspective, at least for me it is. So then we have denial, hide and not seek, potentially arrogance, projection onto great sages and how we set that bar for who we expect ourselves to be. One of the other kind of dark sides for me is that my perspective is most of our emotions, feelings, and experiences of current life stem back from our childhood. And let's just say our inner child is having these feelings of life, having these emotions, having feelings, having reactions. And if I'm a meditator, I might potentially hear those feelings and emotions and deny them and push them down, and I might actually shame them. So rewind that and think about, how did it feel when you were a kid and you expressed yourself to an adult, to your parents, to a teacher, to an uncle, to an aunt, to a grandparent, anyone that you kind of literally looked up to and or metaphorically looked up to? What did it feel like when you were told that what you're feeling, expressing, seeing, imagining, and moving through as a kid, what did that feel like to hear, I'm not going to acknowledge that, or that's not true, or there's no monsters in your closet, or grow up, or you're just imagining things, or you're to be seen, not heard, or I'll give you something to cry about. Isn't that fascinating to consider? A dark side of meditation might be that instead of acknowledging our feelings, instead of acknowledging our emotions, instead of acknowledging our inner children and what's going on with them, that we could actually, through meditative process, be shaming our inner children exactly like we experience the outside world to shame us as children about our experiences of life, rather than acknowledge and celebrate and ask more questions. That for me might be one of the darkest sides of meditation from my perspective. So allowing the human feeling, allowing your feelings, allowing your emotions, acknowledging them, they're okay in my perspective. Lastly, how do we kind of bring these two together? The next video will be about the light side of meditation. But how do we bring these together before that video? For me, one of the most powerful ways that I've learned to bring that together in my own life is, can I invite myself to be the observer of life? Can I observe my feelings? Can I observe my emotions? Can I observe my reactions, my thoughts? Can I pull back some level of consciousness to observe myself in every given moment? At least that's the invitation. However, that's kind of higher self. How do I bring in lower self into that observer perspective? Wow, what if I said that I can allow a part of me to observe my life as watching the movie of Jator, and I can also invite another part to be the participant of life. Maybe that's the lower self. Maybe the participant of life gets to have his feelings, gets to have his emotions, gets to have his reactions, gets to have his opinions, gets to have his dogma, and gets to notice it through the observer. So for me, what that allows then, it allows me to be the observer, the responder, to take a step back and watch myself in this movie of Jator. It also allows me to be very human and experience my emotions and my feelings and express them as well. So my invitation for all of us is to consider that there's a dark side to everything. And to consider, if you're a meditator or you do some type of spiritual practice or mental and emotional practice, what might be your unseen dark sides to that? And how do you use that to be in denial? How do you use that to hide and not seek? How do you use that to be extremely arrogant or self-righteous in your life? How do you project onto people that you pedestal and think they are in their life, and therefore force yourself to be some model of what you think they are? Can you allow yourself to be the participant of life and the observer of life? Thoughts on a Saturday morning here in El Cerrito, California? Please know that these are all considerations and my own experiences. I appreciate you all. Enjoy your day. My ego parts say, and my higher self says, everything will be exactly as it needs to be today. Peace out, y'all.